Welcome to FP Executive. We're joined today by Professor Detlev Zwick from York University's Schulich School of Business, where you're a professor of marketing.
That's correct. Yeah.
I'm very pleased to have you join us today. Marketing is an issue that we're all thinking about these days as we go through great economic turmoil and companies are thinking, well, how much should we spend in our markets? Our business models are changing. I know that you study obviously marketing very closely and watch it closely, but you're also very much informed by, or pardon me, interested in something called co-creation, where I believe, if I'm getting it right, companies work with consumers to create value. Is that the way you would define that?
Yes, I mean the term co-creation is actually just one term of a number of terms that are floating out there. Co-production, co-creation, those are sort of the terms. And yes, what it essentially means is that companies are increasingly trying to include and capture the sort of work, the potential, the productive potential of their consumers to create value for the same consumers that are actually co-creating it. Understanding some of the limitations today that companies have internally in terms of innovation, the capacity to actually create breakthroughs with sort of the paid workforce they have on staff, and how hard it is to compete against sort of the mass intellectuality that's out there, the mass creativity that's out there that can actually be mobilized and appropriated, hopefully, by a company. So, yeah, that's the notion of co-creation.
Let's talk about a model of this. We were mentioning before we came on the air Facebook. This seems to me a very interesting example of co-creation because you had someone who wanted to create a community, an online community, where the content would be created by the users.
That's correct.
And that's where the value would be added. Can you tell me a bit about your view of the Facebook model? I mean, is this a model of co-creation we're going to see more of?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook is really fascinating in the sense that it seems to sort of provide this very good structure on which maybe other sort of more traditional, perhaps even business, can actually look at and see how co-creation looks in a sort of ideal world. Because ideal, I'm saying here, because Facebook, the notion of co-creation is based on the idea of a platform, creating a platform in which consumers, or on which consumers can then build and can produce and can then actually co-create not just with the company but with other consumers. Facebook is ultimately exactly that. It's a platform. It's provided by a company, but then this platform depends on all the creative juices basically brought onto it, to bear onto it by the ones using it. And the value increases every time one of the consumers, one of the users actually interacts with the platform. So that's a fascinating element of it. Now, Facebook is just now starting to think about monetizing it. But so eventually the monetization here comes from the productive work done by its consumers, for which they ultimately at some point will have to pay. So the model is very, in this case of Facebook, is very clear. It's a platform that allows for consumers to produce.
Let's talk about another platform that many people will be familiar with, and that's the iPhone. And I understand that many people sit in their basements developing specific little applications that work on the iPhone. Is this another example of co-creation?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's slightly different in the sense that some things are still controlled by Apple. And Apple actually is an interesting case in and of itself because it has a little bit of a history of struggling with the creative crowd out there. They've seen it happen earlier on with the iPod. When they launched the iPod, they were a little bit taken aback by this group of hackers that basically took over sort of the device itself, creating applications that Apple did not allow for, did not actually want. But Apple could not stop really the production of sort of these hacker applications that are actually many of them were really interesting, very useful, and people liked them. So here you have a group that is doing very interesting stuff with your device. It's not legitimized by Apple. Apple had to figure out back then, it's a few years back now, how to deal with that, because ultimately they're your best customers too. I mean, they're not just this rogue group out there. They're very creative people that like your product, and they're actually creating value. But at that point, Apple wasn't sure whether this is value or a threat. Okay, but this is clearly they're co-creating. Apple was struggling figuring out how to navigate this creativity, this productive force out there. I think they've learned from that.
Yeah, they've brought them into the tent, so to
They've
speak.
now much more brought them into the tent. They realized that they can never completely compete with the mass creativity that's going on out there. They have now thousands of apps weekly. I think they look at 8,000 or something, and there's still some tension occasionally. So they just had to release recently. They had to release to this crowd out there writing applications that how are they actually selecting them. So there was still some issues of transparency because co-creation fundamentally requires transparency. Companies need to adopt a sense of openness, and that is a very difficult step to take.
Well, let's talk about difficult steps involved in this process. One of the things that struck me is that if I'm a company that's involved in co-creation, and I'm thinking that co-creation helps to spread the word about my product, online and through various other mediums, how do I market that? How do I approach marketing my product when I'm using a co-creation model? Do I need to do traditional marketing? Do I need to rethink the way I do marketing? What would you suggest?
Well, I mean, the idea of co-creation, I mean, if you bring them in at the different value sort of points of the value chain, and it's already at the stage of producing, co-creating the actual sort of product, the experience, that is quite different, or that idea of co-creation is quite different from, say, co-creating or letting consumers and your customers take on the communication and sort of the word of mouth to spread the buzz about your product. They can be related, but they can be different. I would argue if you have, as in the case of say the iPhone, if you have a very strong sort of producer community, a co-creation of the product itself, of the value of the hard and software, as in the iPhone, then there's already sort of through that community, through the interaction with these products, there's a very strong sort of user experience that can be actually spread in sort of without traditional marketing. But the brand is not so much affected by this. So the brand can still, so we can still see traditional marketing here coming from Apple, as we see on television, telling us simply about sort of the innovative power of Apple and how cool this device is, how cool the applications are.
Is there two channels? Is there, for example, inbound marketing and outbound marketing happening here at the same time? And what we see with inbound marketing, that is where things go viral and people who sort of hear about it and are searching for it are brought to your product. And then you have to also marry that up with the traditional outbound marketing if you want to make sure you reach more and more people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, what this comes down to is segmentation. Okay, and not everyone is going to be captured by but it's kind of online or viral marketing, going on YouTube and watching videos. I mean, it seems to be a massive phenomenon. It is, but many of us are still actually not spending time doing this. So we still watch television, and so Apple still wants to communicate with us that do not participate in sort of these viral sort of activities. But what's important for sort of the viral marketing kind of approach to consider is that it's very much uncontrollable. It's very difficult to manage. Co-creation relies on the free labor, free work of consumers and customers or innovators, whoever. That's free in the sense of economically free, but it's also free in the sense of uncontrollable. They decide to do what they want to do. And so as a marketer, what you need to acquire, the skill set you need to acquire is much more, has something to do with management, managing populations, managing these crowds, making sure that you're open to them, that you treat them with respect, so they give you something back in return without curtailing too much the creativity that you want to capture, that you want to appropriate. It's a very thin line.
Yeah, this is an interesting challenge because some of the marketing people that I've met are very concerned about controlling the message.
Correct.
And what you're suggesting, it seems, is that if we are looking at a new business model, if we're looking at a new marketing model, what we have to do is sort of pull back a little bit and trust in our brand, and then let it sort of go from there and see what happens.
That's very much the point we're trying to make in our research too. It's this willingness to actually step back and hand over some of the sort of the power. I mean, consumers feel treated with respect once you indicate to them that you actually consider them smart, creative, empowered. But then they will go and do things with your brand potentially. I mean, some of the viral communication, the viral marketing that's out there is, was initiated by the company, by the marketer, but where it goes is out of the hands of the marketer. So you have to really trust your customers and sort of the market out there, that what comes out of viral marketing has an effect on your brand that's positive. At this point, actually, it's very difficult to measure. There's some efforts being made now where we try to capture usually algorithm software related stuff. Where we try to capture sort of the whether it's positive or negative social communication coming out of our attempts to get the consumer to talk about our brand.
But that's a challenge, though, sort of measuring that. I think this has been fascinating, learning about how we need to pull back a little bit and sort of trust in our business models and build these new business models. Professor Zwick, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.